My father let my mother die alone in a hospital room on Christmas Eve. He told everyone he held her hand until the very end. For 5 years, I knew it was a lie, but I had no proof. Then a lawyer called me with a letter my mother wrote 2 weeks before she died. A letter that could only be opened after exactly 5 years. The first line read, "If you're reading this, your father lied." What I discovered about the night my mother died alone, while my father was somewhere he should never have been, changed everything I thought I knew about the man who raised me. And this Christmas, surrounded by 18 family members who worshipped him as a hero, I finally read that letter out loud. I'm Molly, 28 years old, and this is the story of how I shattered 5 years of silence. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. I've spent the last 4 years helping strangers say goodbye to the people they love. As a grief counselor at St. Francis Community Hospital in Denver, I've sat with hundreds of families in their worst moments. I've held hands with widows who couldn't stop shaking. I've helped children write letters to parents they'd never see again. I've guided people through the impossible terrain of loss with patience and professionalism that my supervisors called exceptional. But I couldn't help myself. My apartment in Capitol Hill was small, a one-bedroom with a view of nothing special. On the bookshelf by the window sat the only photograph of my mother I still owned. It showed her at 47, 3 years before she died, laughing at something outside the frame. Her hair was the same honey brown as mine. Her smile was the kind that made you believe everything would be okay. My father had cleaned out most of her things 3 months after the funeral. "We need to move forward," he'd said, boxing up 30 years of her life in a single weekend. I'd managed to save this one photo by hiding it in my car. I remembered how he used to talk about her when she was alive. "Your mother's being dramatic again. She's always making something out of nothing. Don't be like her, Molly. Don't be so sensitive." And the worst part? I believed him. For years, I thought my mother's complaints about chest pain and exhaustion were exaggerations. I thought her tears were manipulation. I thought her need for attention was weakness. Then she died. And I learned that everything my father called drama had been her body trying to tell us she was sick. I learned it too late. The guilt of that, of not believing her, was something I carried every single day. 3 weeks before everything changed, I made the mistake of asking for something small. It was Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house, the same house where we'd gather for Christmas. The same long dining table, the same 18 chairs, the same patriarch at the head. My father, Richard Sheridan, sat where he always sat, at the head of the table, commanding the room with the easy authority of a man who'd spent 30 years running into burning buildings, retired fire captain, recipient of the Mayor's Medal of Valor, the kind of man other men wanted to be. I'd only asked for one thing. "I was thinking," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, "maybe we could put some flowers on the table for Mom this year. Just a small arrangement. To remember her." The table went quiet. My father set down his fork. "Molly." He said my name like a sigh, like I was exhausting him just by existing. "You always have to dramatize everything, don't you? Just like your mother." My brother Derek, 32 and golden, said nothing. His wife Sarah studied her plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. My grandmother Patricia, 79 and devoted to her firstborn son, patted my father's arm. "Richard's right, sweetheart. We need to move forward, not backward." I swallowed my words. I nodded. I finished my meal in silence. Later, in my car, I added another tally to the count I'd been keeping since year 2, 47. That was 47 times I'd stayed silent when I wanted to scream. 47 times I'd let them call me dramatic for simply wanting to remember my mother. I didn't know then that I was about to stop counting. The funeral had been standing room only. 200 people packed into Grace Lutheran Church on a gray January morning in 2024, all of them there to mourn Linda Sheridan and celebrate the family she'd left behind. My father stood at the front, dignified in his grief, accepting condolences with the quiet strength everyone expected from a man like him. Derek delivered the eulogy. My brother, who had visited our mother exactly 4 times during the 6 months I'd taken unpaid leave to care for her, stood at that podium and spoke about her strength, her love, her devotion to family. He cried at all the right moments. He made people laugh with carefully curated memories. He was, everyone agreed afterward, such a good son. No one mentioned that I was the one who'd held her hand during chemotherapy, that I'd learned to change her IV bags, to monitor her oxygen levels, to recognize the sound of her breathing when something was wrong, that I'd slept on a cot in her room for 183 nights because she was afraid of dying alone. Then my father took the microphone. Linda passed peacefully, he told the crowd, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. She knew she was loved. 200 people applauded. I stood in the back row, my fingernails cutting crescents into my palms, and I knew that he was lying. I'd been at the hospital that night. I'd seen the empty chair beside her bed. I'd watched the nurses try to reach him for hours. But I had no proof. Just the fractured memories of a night I'd spent sobbing in a hospital hallway. So I stayed silent. Until 2 weeks before last Christmas, when my phone rang. December 10th, 2028, 2:47 p.m. I was between sessions at the hospital when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Ms. Sheridan, this is William Patterson, attorney at law. I'm calling about your mother, Linda Sheridan. I stepped into an empty consultation room and closed the door. My mother passed away 5 years ago. Yes, I'm aware. His voice was careful, measured. That's precisely why I'm calling. Your mother retained my services in December of 2023 to hold a sealed document. Per her explicit instructions, this document was to remain unopened for exactly 5 years, then delivered to you and you alone. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of document? A letter, 4 pages, handwritten, notarized on December 10th, 2023, 2 weeks before her passing. He paused. Mrs. Sheridan was very specific about the timing. She said, and I quote, "My daughter will need 5 years to become strong enough, and the truth will need 5 years to matter." I couldn't breathe. Can you come to my office this afternoon, Ms. Sheridan? I have the letter here. 2 hours later, I sat in William Patterson's office on the 16th floor of a downtown building, holding a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. The paper was thick, expensive. A notary seal from the state of Colorado marked the back. Take your time, Patterson said. I'll give you privacy. He left. I sat there for a long moment just holding it, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. Then I opened it. The first line read, "My darling daughter, if you're reading this, it means your father lied about the night I died." I couldn't read it in that office. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking too badly to hold the pages. I sat in the parking garage, engine off, reading my mother's words by the dim glow of the overhead light. 4 pages. Her handwriting, the same looping cursive she'd used on birthday cards and grocery lists, covered every inch. In some places, the ink was smudged. Water damage, I thought at first. Then I realized she'd been crying when she wrote this. I'm writing this letter because I know what's coming. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe a month, and I know your father well enough to know what he'll tell everyone after I'm gone. I turned to the second page, my heart pounding. On Christmas Eve, I will call him from the hospital. I already know this because I've been calling him for months and he doesn't answer. He's always busy. He's always on his way. He never comes. I know about Diane. I found the messages in March. I love you. Can't wait to see you. She doesn't suspect anything. I didn't confront him because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my family. Afraid of dying alone. The name hit me like a physical blow. Diane. If I die on a night when he doesn't come, he will lie about it. He will tell everyone he was there. He will make himself the grieving widower, and everyone will believe him because that's what Richard does. He makes people believe. I had to stop reading. My chest was too tight. The parking garage spun around me. My mother had known. She'd known everything, and she'd prepared for it. The last page was still waiting. I sat in that parking garage for an hour, reading the last page over and over. I don't want you to read this letter for revenge, Molly. I want you to read it so you can be free. I spent 30 years in silence. I don't want that for you. If you're strong enough, and I believe you are, I want you to tell the family the truth, not to destroy your father, but to break the cycle of silence that killed me from the inside long before my heart gave out. You are not dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are the only one brave enough to see what others choose to ignore. That is your strength, not your weakness. 14 days until Christmas. The math was simple. Every year, the entire family gathered at my grandmother's house on Christmas Eve. 18 people around one table. It was the only time everyone was together. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my father's closest friends. If I wanted to tell the truth to everyone who'd spent 5 years believing his lies, this was my only chance. If I stayed silent, the narrative would continue. Emma and Lucas, Derek's children, 7 and 5, would grow up believing their grandfather was a hero, and their grandmother died peacefully in his arms. The lie would calcify into family legend. If I spoke, I could lose everything. My father would never forgive me. Derek might choose his side. My grandmother, at 79, might not survive the shock of learning what her son had done. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Aunt Helen? It's Molly. My voice cracked. I need to see you. Mom left me a letter. On the other end, my mother's sister began to cry. We met at a coffee shop in Lakewood, far from anyone who might recognize us. Helen Mitchell looked older than I remembered, 54 now, with gray threading through hair that used to match my mother's exactly. She read the letter in silence. When she finished, she set it down with trembling hands. I knew, she whispered. Molly, I knew. What do you mean? The night Linda died, she called me from the hospital at 9:30 p.m. She was crying. Helen's voice broke. She said, Richard won't come. I've called 3 times. I'm scared, Helen. I don't want to die alone. The coffee shop noise faded to nothing. I called Richard myself at 9:45, Helen continued. I begged him to go to the hospital. You know what he said? She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. He said, She's being dramatic. She'll be fine. I'll go in the morning. He knew she was dying? The hospital had called him at 8:47 p.m. to tell him her condition was deteriorating. They called again at 9:32, and again at 10:15. Helen pulled a folded paper from her purse. I requested the phone records last year. I was going to do something, but I had no other proof. Just my word against his. She slid the paper across the table. Hospital letterhead. A call log showing 3 outgoing calls to Richard Sheridan's personal cell phone. 8:47 p.m., 9:32 p.m., 10:15 p.m. None lasting more than 15 seconds. Voicemail. Every single one. Linda died at 11:47 p.m., Helen said. Richard arrived at the hospital at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. Christmas Day. She gripped my hand. You're not crazy, Molly. You're not being dramatic. You're the only one brave enough to remember the truth. December 15th. 9 days until Christmas. I tried one last time to find an ally in my own family. Derek, do you remember the night Mom died? The phone line crackled with his hesitation. What do you mean, which night? Christmas Eve, 2023. Do you remember where Dad was? At the hospital, with Mom. Why are you asking? Are you sure? Did you actually see him there? Molly. His voice hardened in that familiar way, the same tone our father used when he was about to dismiss someone. What is this about? I've been thinking about that night. Some things don't add up. Like what? I almost told him. The words were right there, ready to spill out. But something stopped me. Maybe the memory of him standing at that podium, accepting praise for being a devoted son while I sat invisible in the back row. Never mind, I said. I'm just I miss her. Derek sighed. You're always like this, Molly. Dad's right. You're too much like Mom. Always dwelling on things, making everything into a tragedy. A pause. Look, I have to go. Sarah's calling me for dinner. Wait. I caught something in his voice. Is something happening for Christmas? Something different? Oh, yeah. His tone brightened. Dad's really excited. He wants to introduce someone to the family. He's been seeing this woman for a while now. He thinks it's time. My blood turned to ice. Her name's Diane. She seems nice. Dad says she's helped him through a lot since Mom passed. I couldn't speak. Molly? You still there? I have to go, I managed. I hung up before he could hear me scream. My hands shook as I opened Facebook on my laptop. Diane Morrison. Aurora, Colorado. 52 years old. Her profile picture showed a woman with highlighted blonde hair and a practiced smile. Most of her posts were private, but one was public, posted just 2 months ago. A photo of her and my father at a restaurant, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. The caption read, "Date night with my special someone." I scrolled down. More photos. A hiking trip in September, a concert in August, a happy 6 months post in July. 6 months. I did the math. They'd gone public in January 2028. But according to my mother's letter, the affair had started in March 2023, at least. 9 months before my mother died. I went back to the letter, to the part I'd barely been able to read the first time. The night I call him from the hospital, I know where he'll be. He'll be with her. He'll choose her over me, just like he's been choosing her for months. And when I die, he'll pretend he was by my side the whole time. My mother had known. She'd known she would die alone because her husband was with his mistress. She'd known, and she'd written it down, and she'd given me 5 years to become strong enough to face it. And now my father was going to bring that woman to Christmas dinner, to the table where my mother used to sit. On the anniversary of the night she died alone while he was in Diane's bed. I picked up my phone and called Aunt Helen. I'm going to read the letter at Christmas dinner, I said. Will you be there? I'll be there, she said. I'll confirm everything. December 18th. 6 days until Christmas. I sat in my apartment with the letter spread across my kitchen table, reading it for what felt like the 100th time. The pages were starting to soften at the edges from handling. My phone buzzed. Helen. I have the phone records, she said. Official copies from St. Francis. 3 calls to Richard's personal number on December 24th, 2023. 8:47 p.m., 9:32 p.m., 10:15 p.m. All went to voicemail. Can you bring them on Christmas Eve? Already made copies. She paused. Molly, are you sure about this? Once you read that letter, there's no taking it back. Richard will never forgive you. Your grandmother might not either. I looked at the photograph of my mother on my bookshelf, that frozen smile, that moment of joy I'd never see again. I've spent 5 years protecting a man who let my mother die alone, I said. I've spent 5 years being called dramatic for wanting to remember her. I've spent 5 years watching him rewrite history while everyone applauded. And now? Now I have proof. I touched the notary seal on the envelope. Mom gave me this for a reason. She wanted the truth to come out, not for revenge, she says that in the letter, for freedom, for me, for all of us. Helen was quiet for a moment. Linda always said you were the strongest one in the family. She said you just didn't know it yet. I know it now. Then I'll see you on Christmas Eve. I'll sit across from you at the table. When you're ready, just look at me, I'll nod, and when Richard tries to deny it, I'll stand up and confirm every word. 6 days. 6 days until I stopped being silent. December 20th. 4 days until Christmas. I approached this like I approached my work. Methodically, professionally, without letting emotion cloud my judgment. First, I made copies of everything. The original letter stayed in my apartment, locked in a fireproof safe I'd bought specifically for this purpose. The copies went into a manila folder that would travel with me to my grandmother's house. Second, I called Margaret Torres, the head nurse at St. Francis, and a colleague I'd known for 3 years. I need to ask you something sensitive, I said. About a patient from 2023, Linda Sheridan. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Your mother? Yes. I need to know if there's any record of calls made from the hospital to family members on the night she died. Give me a day. She called back the next morning. 3 calls to a Richard Sheridan between 8:47 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. on December 24, 2023. Standard protocol when a patient's condition deteriorates. All 3 went to voicemail. She paused. Molly, I remember that night. I was on shift. Your mother asked us to keep calling him. She kept saying he would come. I closed my eyes. Thank you, Margaret. Whatever you're doing, she said carefully, I hope it brings you peace. I assembled my folder, the letter, the phone records from Helen, a screenshot of Diane's Facebook post with my father. I didn't plan to use everything. The letter would be enough. But if my father tried to deny it, if he called me dramatic, if he claimed I was making things up, I would have proof he couldn't dismiss. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was preparing to never be silenced again. December 23rd, the night before Christmas Eve. I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I sat on my couch with the letter in my lap, reading the 3rd page for the last time before tomorrow. Molly, you are the strongest person I know. You just haven't realized it yet. Your father calls you sensitive like it's an insult, but being sensitive means you see the truth when everyone else chooses to look away. That's not weakness, that's courage. I traced my finger over her handwriting. The loops and curves I'd known my whole life. The way she crossed her T's with a little flourish. The way her S's leaned slightly to the right. I don't want you to read this letter to hurt your father. I want you to read it so you can stop carrying his lies. I spent 30 years protecting his image. I don't want you to spend 30 more. Break the cycle, my darling. Not with anger, not with revenge, with truth. Truth is the only thing that sets us free. I looked at the photograph on my bookshelf. My mother at 47, laughing at something I'd never know. I'll do it, Mom, I whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow, I'll tell them everything. I placed the letter carefully in my folder, checked that I had the phone records, checked that my phone was charged for the drive to grandmother's house. Then I lay down on my couch, pulled a blanket over myself, and waited for morning. In 12 hours, I would walk into my grandmother's house. In 12 hours, I would see my father introduce his mistress to the family. In 12 hours, I would finally speak. December 24th, 2028, 5:30 p.m. The house looked exactly like it did in every Christmas memory I had. 2 stories of red brick, white lights wound around the porch railings. A wreath on the door that my grandmother had been hanging in the same spot for 40 years. The smell of roasting turkey drifted through the cold December air. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a moment, watching family members arrive. Uncle Robert and Aunt Christine with their 2 teenagers, my cousin Jessica with her husband, Derek's minivan pulling into the driveway, Emma and Lucas tumbling out in matching Christmas sweaters. 18 people, just like every year. I grabbed my purse, the folder tucked safely inside, and walked up the front path. The house was warm and loud with conversation. I hugged my grandmother, accepted a glass of wine from Aunt Christine, smiled at cousins I only saw once a year. Everything normal, everything routine. Then I walked into the kitchen. My father stood by the island, his arm around a blonde woman in a red cashmere sweater. They were laughing at something, comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of months, years of intimacy. Diane Morrison, in my grandmother's kitchen, standing exactly where my mother used to stand when she helped with the cooking. My father looked up and saw me. Molly, come meet Diane. I couldn't move. Diane, this is my daughter Molly. She's a counselor at a hospital downtown. He said it like it was a minor detail, something barely worth mentioning. Diane smiled at me. So nice to finally meet you. Your father talks about you all the time. At 6 p.m., Aunt Helen walked through the door. Our eyes met across the room. She nodded. 7:00 p.m. Dinner was served. We filed into the dining room like we did every year, finding our seats around the long oak table my grandfather had built 50 years ago. My grandmother sat at one end, frail but alert. My father sat at the other, the patriarch's position, the seat of authority, and next to him, in the chair where my mother had sat for 30 years, was Diane. I took my seat across from Aunt Helen, my purse on the floor beside me, the folder pressed against my ankle like a heartbeat. My father stood, raising his glass. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth I'd heard my whole life. "This year is special because I want to introduce someone who's become very important to me." He looked down at Diane with an expression I'd never seen him give my mother. "Diane has helped me through some very difficult years since Linda passed. I'm grateful to have her in my life." Applause. Tom Bradley and Jerry Hoffman, my father's best friends from the fire department, both in their 60s, nodded approvingly. My grandmother smiled and raised her glass. "To new beginnings," someone said. I watched Derek across the table. He was clapping, but his eyes kept darting to me. Sarah studied her plate. "Daddy," Emma said, tugging on Derek's sleeve. "Who's Grandma Linda?" The table went quiet for a moment. "Grandma Linda was your grandmother," Derek said carefully. "She passed away before you were born." "Was she nice?" My father answered before Derek could. "She was a good woman, but she was often sad. Like your Aunt Molly." He chuckled, and a few people laughed along. My hand found my purse. The meal continued. Turkey was carved. Potatoes were passed. Wine glasses were refilled. Tom Bradley leaned across the table toward me. "So, Molly, still working at that hospital? Grief counseling, right?" He said it the way people talk about hobbies, not careers. Before I could answer, my father cut in. "Molly likes sad things." He shook his head with a patronizing smile. "Just like her mother. Linda was always dramatizing everything, making mountains out of molehills. I worry about Molly sometimes. She holds on to the past too much. Not like Derek." He gestured toward my brother with his wine glass. "Derek knows how to move forward." Diane laughed softly, as if my father had made a clever joke. I felt my face flush. 48. This was 48. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "grief counseling requires a master's degree and specialized certification. I help families navigate the most difficult moments of their lives." My father waved his hand dismissively. Of course, of course. I'm just saying you could choose something more uplifting." "Like what Dad did," Derek added, trying to smooth things over. "Saving lives, real hero stuff." "Speaking of which," Jerry Hoffman said, "Richard, remember that Christmas you pulled those two kids out of the apartment fire on Colfax? Must have been, what, 2015? And just like that, the conversation shifted to my father's heroics, his medals, his 30 years of service, the lives he'd saved. No one mentioned the life he'd abandoned. "Daddy," Emma asked again, "was Grandpa with Grandma Linda when she went to heaven?" My father smiled at his granddaughter. "Yes, sweetheart. Grandpa was right there holding her hand. She wasn't alone." The lie hung in the air like smoke. I reached into my purse. My father turned to Diane, his voice warm with affection. "You know what I love about you? You're not dramatic like Linda was. You know how to actually live." Diane beamed at him. Something inside me snapped. Not violently, not the way I'd always imagined it would happen. It was quieter than that, like a lock finally clicking open after years of trying the wrong keys. I looked at Aunt Helen across the table. She was watching me, her hands clasped tight in her lap. She gave me the smallest nod. I looked at my grandmother, 80 years old and devoted to her son. At Derek, who had never once defended me. At Tom and Jerry, who thought my father was a hero. At Diane, sitting in my mother's chair, wearing my mother's place in this family like it was something she'd earned. I looked at Emma, 7 years old, who would grow up believing her grandmother died peacefully in her grandfather's arms. I thought about my mother, alone in that hospital room, calling a husband who never came, dying with a phone in her hand and hope in her heart that someone, anyone, would be there at the end. I set down my fork. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder. "I have something I need to say," I said. My voice didn't shake. "About Mom. About the night she died." The table fell silent. My father's smile froze on his face. "Molly, this isn't the time." "It's been 5 years," I said. 5 years of silence. 5 years of you telling everyone you were there when she died. I opened the folder. Mom left me a letter. She wrote it 2 weeks before she passed. And she told me the truth. Before I tell you what happened when I stood up at that table, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, would you read the letter in front of everyone, or would you confront your father privately? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're following along with this story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I stood up from my chair, the folder in my hands. 18 faces stared at me, some confused, some annoyed. My father's expression had shifted from frozen smile to something harder, a warning. "Molly, sit down." His voice was low, controlled, the voice he used when he expected to be obeyed. "No." The word hung in the air. I couldn't remember the last time I'd said no to him. 5 years ago, I continued, Mom died in St. Francis Hospital. Dad told everyone he was there. He told everyone he held her hand. He told everyone she passed peacefully with him by her side. "That's enough." My father started to rise from his chair. "It was a lie." The room went completely still. "Mom wrote this letter 2 weeks before she died." I held up the pages, 4 sheets of cream-colored stationery, my mother's handwriting visible even from across the room. She had it notarized. She gave it to a lawyer with instructions to deliver it to me after exactly 5 years. Derek's voice was strained. "Molly, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what Mom asked me to do." I looked at my brother, then at my grandmother, then at the faces of aunts and uncles and cousins who had spent 5 years believing a fairy tale. "I'm telling the truth." My father's face had gone pale. "Whatever's in that letter, Linda was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly." "The first line reads," I said, my voice clear and steady, "If you're reading this, your father lied about the night I died." Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Tom Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My grandmother gripped the edge of the table, and I began to read. My father moved toward me, his hand outstretched. "Give me that letter, Molly. You have no right." "Richard." Aunt Helen's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood up from her chair, her eyes fixed on my father. "Let her speak." He turned on her, his face reddening. "This is none of your business, Helen. This is my family." "Linda was my sister." Helen's voice didn't waver. "That makes it my business." "She was mentally ill. Everyone knows that. She imagined things, she exaggerated. She was dying." I held the letter steady. "And you weren't there." My grandmother's voice trembled from the end of the table. "Richard, what is happening? Explain this." "Mother, there's nothing to explain. Molly is having some kind of episode. She's always been unstable, just like Linda." "Then let her read the letter." Tom Bradley spoke up, his brow furrowed. "If there's nothing to hide, let her read it. We'll see who's telling the truth." My father stared at his oldest friend. Something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe, or the realization that his control was slipping. "Fine." He sat back down, his jaw tight. "Read your letter. But when everyone sees this is just more of your mother's drama, you'll owe this family an apology." I looked at Aunt Helen. She nodded again, her eyes bright with tears. I looked at Derek, who sat frozen, his children pressed against his sides. I looked at Diane, who had gone very pale. And I began to read my mother's words out loud. "My darling daughter, if you're reading this, it means your father lied about the night I died. I'm writing this because I know what's coming. And I know what he'll tell everyone after I'm gone. My voice filled the silent room. On Christmas Eve, I will call your father from the hospital. I already know this because I've been calling him for months and he doesn't answer. He's always busy. He's always on his way. He never comes. I heard someone inhale sharply. I didn't look up to see who. The hospital will call him when my condition gets worse. They'll call multiple times. He won't answer those calls either. I turned to the second page. I know about Diane. I found the messages in March. I love you. Can't wait to see you. She doesn't suspect anything. I didn't confront him because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my family, afraid of dying alone. Diane stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Richard, what is she talking about? My father said nothing. His face had gone gray. I continued reading. The night I call him from the hospital, I know where he'll be. He'll be with her. He'll choose her over me, just like he's been choosing her for months. This is insane, my father said, but his voice had lost its authority. Linda was paranoid. She was, and when I die, I read over him, he'll pretend he was by my side the whole time. He'll tell everyone he held my hand. He'll make himself the grieving widower. And everyone will believe him, because that's what Richard does. He makes people believe. I looked up from the letter, looked directly at my father. Mom knew, Dad. She knew you wouldn't come. She knew where you'd be, and she knew you'd lie about it. Emma's small voice broke the silence. Daddy, did Grandpa lie? Derek couldn't answer her. I turned to the third page, my hands steady now. On Christmas Eve, I called your father 3 times from the hospital, 8:47 p.m., 9:32 p.m., 10:15 p.m. He didn't answer any of them. I looked at Aunt Helen. Tell them. Helen stood, her voice thick with emotion. I was there. Linda called me at 9:30 that night, crying. She said, Richard won't come. I've called 3 times. I'm scared, Helen. I don't want to die alone. That's a lie, my father said. But he didn't sound convincing anymore. I called you myself at 9:45, Helen continued, staring at him. I begged you to go to the hospital. You know what you said? She's being dramatic. She'll be fine. I'll go in the morning. Tom Bradley's face had gone hard. Richard, is this true? My father didn't answer. I pulled out the phone records from the folder. These are the hospital's call logs from December 24th, 2023. 3 calls to Richard Sheridan's personal cell phone, 8:47 p.m., 9:32 p.m., 10:15 p.m. All went to voicemail. I set the paper on the table where everyone could see the hospital letterhead, the timestamps, the proof. Mom died at 11:47 p.m., I said. Dad arrived at the hospital at 6:15 a.m. the next morning, more than 6 hours after she was gone. Derek's voice cracked. Dad, you told me you were there. You told me you held her hand. My father finally looked at his son, and for the first time in my life, I saw something I'd never seen before. He had no answer, he had no story. He had nothing left to hide behind. My father made one last attempt. This is a conspiracy, he said, his voice rising. Helen and Molly have been planning this. They forged these documents. Linda was mentally unstable. Everyone knew that. She probably wrote this letter during one of her episodes. The letter was notarized, I said calmly. December 10th, 2023, by a licensed notary in the state of Colorado. Attorney William Patterson can confirm its authenticity. The phone records are from the hospital, Helen added. Official records, time-stamped, verified. I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook. And this, I said, turning the screen toward the table, is a post from Diane Morrison's profile, dated 2 months ago. Date night with my special someone. That's you, Dad. Celebrating your relationship while the rest of us still thought you were a grieving widower. Diane's face crumpled. Richard, you told me your wife died of a sudden heart attack. You told me you were by her side. You told me... She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. He lied to you too, I said, not unkindly. He lies to everyone. My grandmother was crying now, silent tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. Richard, tell me this isn't true. Tell me my son didn't. My father looked at his mother, at his friends, at his son and grandchildren, at the woman he'd brought to replace the wife he'd abandoned. He opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time in 5 years, maybe for the first time in his life, Richard Sheridan had nothing to say. The silence was his confession. You weren't there, Derek said, his voice hollow. Mom died alone and you weren't there. My father still didn't speak. He didn't have to. Diane was the first to leave. She grabbed her purse from the back of her chair, her hands shaking. You told me you were a devoted husband. You told me you held her hand when she died. Her voice broke. You told me she passed peacefully. Diane, let me explain. You lied to me. She backed away from him. You lied to everyone. About everything. She walked out of the dining room. A moment later, the front door slammed. Tom Bradley stood up next. He'd known my father for 30 years, served beside him in the fire department, attended his wedding, stood as godfather to Derek. His face was a mask of something I'd never seen directed at Richard Sheridan before: disgust. You told me you were there, Richard. At the funeral, you looked me in the eye and told me you held Linda's hand when she passed. He shook his head slowly. 30 years I've known you. 30 years I thought you were a man of honor. He turned and walked toward the door. Jerry Hoffman followed without a word. 3 people gone in less than 5 minutes. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. My grandmother was still crying. Derek sat frozen, his children pressed against him, confused and frightened. Sarah had her arm around Emma, whispering something I couldn't hear. My father sat at the head of the table, the patriarch's seat, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His authority, his control, his carefully constructed image, all of it crumbling in real time. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow, exhausted relief. The truth was finally out, and nothing would ever be the same. The story isn't over yet. My father lost 3 people in 5 minutes, but what happened next, between me, my brother, and the rest of my family, was just as important. If you want to know how my father reacted and how I finally set boundaries, keep watching. And if you're rooting for me, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. My father sat down heavily in his chair. The man who had commanded rooms his entire life, who had run into burning buildings, who had received medals from the mayor, who had controlled every narrative in this family for as long as I could remember, looked old, diminished, like someone had let the air out of him. My grandmother reached across the table toward him. Richard, please, tell me this is a misunderstanding. Tell me my son didn't. I thought she'd be fine. His voice was barely above a whisper. She was always calling about something, always making everything into a crisis. I thought it was just another one of her episodes. She was dying, I said quietly. The hospital called you 3 times to tell you her condition was deteriorating. That wasn't drama. That was her body shutting down. He didn't look at me. I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't answer the phone to find out. Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked around the table until he was standing in front of our father. You told me you were there. His voice shook. At the funeral, when everyone was crying, you told me you held her hand. You told me she knew she was loved. I believed you. I've been telling my kids that story for 5 years. My father finally looked up at his son. Derek, Where were you? Derek's voice cracked. Where were you when Mom was dying? The silence stretched. My father didn't answer. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just sat there, stripped of every story he'd ever told, with nothing left to hide behind. I picked up the letter again. The final page. There's one more thing Mom wanted me to read. My father closed his eyes. Molly, I'm not writing this letter for revenge. I'm writing it so you can be free. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I kept reading. I spent 30 years in silence. I protected your father's image. I made excuses for his absences, his coldness, his affairs. I told myself it was for the family. I told myself it was what a good wife did. My grandmother made a small, wounded sound. But silence didn't protect anyone. Silence only protected the person who was hurting me. And I don't want you to spend 30 years the way I did. I looked up at the faces around the table, my family fractured and raw, and finally seeing the truth. Break the cycle, my darling. Not with anger, not with revenge, with truth. Because silence doesn't protect anyone. Silence only protects the liar. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the folder. That's all Mom wanted, I said. Not to destroy Dad. Not to tear this family apart. She just wanted the truth to be told. She wanted us to stop protecting someone who didn't deserve our protection. Derek looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years. Molly, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have believed you. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I spent 5 years calling you dramatic, he continued, his eyes wet. I spent 5 years taking Dad's side. And you were right. You were right the whole time. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Derek pulled me into a hug, the first real embrace we'd shared since our mother's funeral. I'm so sorry, he said into my hair. I should have seen it. I should have known. You believed what you wanted to believe, I said. We all did for a while. Sarah approached us, her arms still around Emma. I'm sorry too, Molly. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to cause problems. I should have said something. I shook my head. You're saying something now. That's what matters. Emma tugged on my sleeve. Aunt Molly? Was Grandma Linda nice? I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that reminded me so much of my mother's. Grandma Linda was the nicest person I ever knew. She loved you so much, even though she never got to meet you. She would have been so proud of you. Was she sad like Grandpa said? I thought about how to answer that. Grandma Linda was brave, I said finally. Sometimes brave people feel sad because they see things that other people pretend aren't there. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It means they're strong enough to face the truth. Derek crouched down beside us. I'm going to tell you real stories about Grandma Linda, he said to his daughter. True stories, not the ones Grandpa told. Emma nodded solemnly. Okay, Daddy. Lucas, only 5, didn't fully understand what was happening, but he hugged my leg anyway, and I picked him up, holding him close. Across the room, my father sat alone at the head of the table. No one was looking at him anymore. For the first time in my life, he wasn't the center of attention. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. I set Lucas down and turned to face my father. He was still sitting at the head of the table, but the position meant nothing now. The authority it once represented had evaporated. Dad. He looked up at me. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or shame. It was hard to tell. I didn't read this letter to destroy you, I said, keeping my voice steady. I read it because Mom deserved to be remembered truthfully, and because I couldn't spend another year pretending. He said nothing. But I need you to understand something. I took a breath. I won't be at family events where you continue to deny what happened. I won't sit at a table where Mom is called dramatic or crazy. I won't let Emma and Lucas grow up with lies about their grandmother. You're giving me an ultimatum? His voice was hoarse. I'm setting a boundary. I met his eyes. If you want a relationship with me, you need to acknowledge what you did. Not to me, to yourself, and to Mom's memory. Linda is dead. What difference does it make now? It makes a difference to me. It makes a difference to Derek. It makes a difference to Helen. I gestured around the room. It makes a difference to everyone who spent 5 years believing your story. My grandmother spoke up, her voice trembling. Richard, I think you should go home. We all need time. My father stared at his mother, the one person who had always been on his side. Then he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him. And for the first time in 5 years, I could breathe. I gathered my folder and my purse. I should go too, I said to the room. I think everyone needs space to process this. My grandmother nodded, still wiping tears from her cheeks. Molly, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to. You don't have to say anything right now, Grandma. I walked over and kissed her forehead. Just take care of yourself. Aunt Helen met me at the door. I'll drive you home. You shouldn't be alone tonight. Outside, Denver was cold and quiet. A light snow had started falling, dusting the cars and the lawn with white. Christmas lights twinkled on the houses up and down the street, cheerful and oblivious to what had just happened inside. We sat in Helen's car for a moment before she started the engine. You did it, she said softly. You actually did it. I did what Mom asked me to do. Linda would be so proud of you. Helen reached over and squeezed my hand. She always said you were the strongest one in the family. She was right. I looked out the window at my grandmother's house, warm light spilling from the windows. Inside, my family was trying to make sense of everything they'd just learned. Nothing would be the same after tonight. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. I'm sorry, Molly. I mean it. Can I call you tomorrow? I want to hear more about Mom. The real stories. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, yes, I'd like that. Helen started the car. As we pulled away from the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Not happiness, not yet, but lightness. Like a weight I'd been carrying had finally been set down. Helen stayed the night at my apartment. We sat on my couch with mugs of hot chocolate, looking through old photo albums I'd kept hidden in my closet for years. Pictures my father didn't know I had. Photos of my mother as a young woman, before she married him. Before everything became about managing his image. Look at her here, Helen said, pointing to a photo of my mother at maybe 25, laughing on a beach somewhere. This was before she met Richard. She wanted to be a teacher, did you know that? She was going to get her degree, but then she got pregnant with Derek and she gave it up. She gave up a lot of things. Helen turned the page. But she never gave up on you. Even at the end, she was thinking about you, making sure you'd have what you needed to be free. I touched the photograph. My mother's smile frozen in time. A version of her I'd never really known. I wish I'd believed her, I said quietly. When she complained about being tired, about her chest hurting, I thought she was exaggerating. Dad always said, "You were a child believing your parent," Helen interrupted gently. "That's not your fault. The fault belongs to the person who taught you not to trust her." At midnight, I lit a candle and placed it next to my mother's photograph on the bookshelf. I did it, Mom, I whispered. I broke the cycle. I told the truth. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Helen came to stand beside me. "Merry Christmas, Linda," she said softly. "Your daughter did you proud." We stood there together, two women who had loved Linda Sheridan, finally able to mourn her properly. December 31st, 2028. Derek called, just like he promised. We talked for 2 hours, the longest conversation we'd had since we were teenagers. He told me things I'd never known. How he'd always felt pressure to be the good son, the one who didn't cause problems. How he'd convinced himself that ignoring the cracks in our family was the same as keeping it together. How he'd spent 5 years feeling like something was wrong, but being too afraid to look at it directly. I should have asked more questions, he said. After Mom died, I should have wondered why you seemed so angry. I didn't want to know. I understand, I said. And I did. Denial was easier than truth. I'd lived in denial myself once. He also told me what had happened after I left on Christmas Eve. Tom Bradley and Jerry Hoffman had officially ended their friendship with our father. 30 years of brotherhood, gone in a single night. The news was already spreading through the fire department community. Not the details, but the whispers. Something had happened at Richard Sheridan's Christmas dinner. Something bad. Diane had blocked my father's number. She'd posted a cryptic message on Facebook. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. It had gotten 47 likes. My grandmother had called my father the next morning and told him she needed time to think. For the first time in his life, Patricia Sheridan wasn't automatically taking her son's side. "What about Dad?" I asked. "Have you talked to him?" "He called me once," Derek said. "He wanted me to tell you that you'd ruined his life." "What did you say?" I told him he'd ruined it himself, then I hung up. March 2029. 3 months after Christmas, the ripples were still spreading. My father resigned from the local Veterans Council. The official reason was personal matters, but everyone in the community knew something had happened. The whispers had grown louder, the details filling in through gossip and speculation. Richard Sheridan, the hero firefighter, wasn't quite the man everyone thought he was. He'd moved out of his house in Aurora, the one he'd shared with Diane for those secret months, and into a small apartment on the other side of town. I didn't know the address. I didn't ask. Derek and Sarah started bringing Emma and Lucas to visit me every month. We'd go to the park, or the zoo, or just sit in my apartment eating pizza and looking at pictures of their grandmother. "This is Grandma Linda at her college graduation," I'd tell them, showing them photos from Helen's collection. "She wanted to be a teacher." "She's pretty," Emma would say. "She looks like you, Aunt Molly." I started writing everything down. Every memory I had of my mother, every story Helen told me, every photograph and its history. I wanted Emma and Lucas to know who their grandmother really was. Not the dramatic woman their grandfather had described, but the brave, loving person she'd actually been. Helen and I developed a new tradition: dinner together on the first Sunday of every month. We'd talk about Linda, about the family, about healing. Sometimes we'd cry. Sometimes we'd laugh. Always, we'd remember. My father never apologized. I stopped waiting for him to. Some people never change. Some people never admit they were wrong. But I'd learned that my healing didn't depend on his acknowledgement. I had the truth. That was enough. April 2029. Emma brought me a drawing she'd made at school. It was a family portrait, the kind 7-year-olds make with stick figures and bright colors. There was Derek and Sarah, tall figures with brown hair. There was Lucas, smaller, with a big smile. There was Emma herself in a purple dress. And there, floating above them with angel wings, was another figure. Brown hair like mine, a big smile, a halo. "That's Grandma Linda," Emma explained, pointing. "She's watching us from heaven. She's happy because we remember her now." I had to blink back tears. "It's beautiful, Emma. Can I keep it?" "I made it for you," she said, "because you told us the truth about Grandma. Daddy said that was really brave." Derek was standing in the doorway watching us. Our eyes met. "She asks about Linda all the time now," he said quietly. "Wants to know what her favorite color was, what she liked to eat, whether she would have liked Emma's drawings." "Purple," I said. Her favorite color was purple, and she would have loved Emma's drawings. She would have put every single one on her refrigerator. Emma beamed. Later, after Derek and the kids had gone home, I hung the drawing on my own refrigerator, right next to the photograph of my mother laughing on that beach years before I was born. 2 images of Linda Sheridan, one from before, one from after. The woman she'd been, and the grandmother she'd become in her granddaughter's imagination. The cycle was breaking. Not perfectly, not completely. Healing doesn't work that way. But Emma would grow up knowing the truth. Lucas would grow up with real stories instead of lies. And that was my mother's legacy. That was what she'd wanted all along. Christmas 2029. I hosted dinner at my apartment for the first time. It was a smaller gathering than the ones at my grandmother's house. Just 6 of us. Me, Helen, Derek, Sarah, Emma, and Lucas. My grandmother had declined the invitation. She was spending Christmas with my father, unable to completely abandon her son, even after everything. I understood. I didn't agree, but I understood. The table was set for 6, but I'd placed a 7th setting at the head. A photograph of my mother, a small vase of purple flowers, and a lit candle. To Grandma Linda, Emma said solemnly, raising her glass of apple juice. To Linda, the adults echoed. We ate turkey and mashed potatoes and pie. We laughed at Lucas's jokes and Emma's stories about school. We talked about the future, Derek's new job, Sarah's plans to go back to school, my promotion to senior counselor at St. Francis. After dinner, Derek pulled me aside. Thank you, he said, for last year, for being brave enough to tell the truth when I wasn't. Thank you for listening, I said, for believing me when it mattered. He hugged me, a real hug, the kind we used to share before our family fractured. Merry Christmas, Molly. Merry Christmas, Derek. Through the window, snow was falling on Denver. Inside, my family, smaller now but more honest, was together. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood at my window watching the snow fall. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the one who counted her silences, the one who swallowed her words at every family gathering, the one who believed deep down that maybe she really was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much like her mother. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who understood that sensitivity wasn't weakness, that seeing the truth when others looked away wasn't a flaw, it was a gift, that speaking up, even when it cost you everything, was sometimes the only way to be free. If you're watching this and you're holding on to a truth that your family doesn't want to hear, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not too sensitive. You're just brave enough to see what others choose to ignore. Breaking the cycle of silence isn't easy. You might lose people. You might be called a troublemaker, a liar, a family destroyer. You might spend years wondering if you did the right thing. But you'll have something more valuable than approval. You'll have the truth, and you'll have yourself. My mother taught me that from beyond the grave, through a letter she wrote knowing she was dying, knowing her husband would lie, knowing I would need 5 years to become strong enough. She was right about everything, especially about me. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If anything I've shared resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever had to hold on to a truth that your family didn't want to acknowledge? How did you handle it? What would you have done in my situation? Your stories matter. Your experiences matter. And sometimes, just knowing that someone else understands can make all the difference. If this video meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you know. And check out the description for more stories like this one. Stories about family, truth, and finding the courage to speak up. I'm Molly. And I believe this with my whole heart. Silence doesn't protect anyone. Silence only protects the liar. The truth is always worth telling, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything you thought you couldn't live without. Because on the other side of that truth is freedom, and freedom is worth everything. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.